This is you, casually complaining about your phone battery dying at 15% while ordering delivery food you'll eat in climate-controlled comfort. Now backtrack past your immediate family, past every generation that struggled to put food on the table, all the way to this guy crouched in a muddy trench, frantically trying to figure out why his own weapon just exploded in his face. That guy, that's your ancestor. He has no name, no boots that fit, and no idea that you, a distant descendant who gets genuinely upset when Wi-Fi takes more than 3 seconds to connect, even exist. But here's the thing. If that guy, or anyone in your ancestral chain, had been killed by his own military's brilliant innovations, you wouldn't be here. You're not here because you're special. You're here because generation after generation of desperate humans got lucky, stayed stubborn, and didn't die when their own side's weapons tried to murder them first. So let's take a look at how close you and your ancestors have come, over and over again, to being wiped out by friendly fire from weapons that were supposed to help them win wars. We're going to rank 5 times your bloodline was nearly ended by military genius gone horribly, catastrophically wrong. From whoops, minor design flaw, to Jesus Christ, who approved this death trap, levels of your ancestors almost got deleted by their own team bad. Let's get right into it. Coming in at number 5 is the puckle gun. Invented in 1718 and known as the machine gun that couldn't machine. The early 18th century was a time when European powers were constantly at each other's throats, and military inventors were desperately trying to give their armies an edge. Enter James Puckle, a London lawyer who clearly watched too many people reload muskets and thought, "There's got to be a faster way to kill people." His solution was the puckle gun. Essentially the world's first machine gun, a tripod-mounted beast that could theoretically fire 63 rounds in 7 minutes instead of the pathetic 3 rounds most soldiers could manage with a musket. The British Navy was interested. Investors threw money at it. Everyone was convinced this would revolutionize warfare and make England the dominant sea power. The gun featured a rotating cylinder that would advance to the next chamber after each shot, operated by a hand crank, and it was supposed to be the terror of the seas. If you were alive back then and unlucky enough to be assigned to one of these mechanical marvels, you'd quickly discover that the puckle gun had one tiny problem. It didn't work. The thing jammed constantly. The rotating mechanism would seize up after a few shots, and the chambers would misfire more often than they'd actually fire. You'd be cranking away frantically while enemy ships approached, and instead of unleashing devastating firepower, you'd be producing sad clicking sounds and the occasional explosion that sent shrapnel flying backward into your own face. Good luck explaining to your captain why you're bleeding from your forehead, while the enemy is still very much alive, and now very much annoyed. The puckle gun was quietly shelved after a few embarrassing demonstrations where it failed to fire more than a handful of rounds before breaking down completely. The lesson learned was that maybe, just maybe, you should test your revolutionary weapons before betting your Navy's future on them. Number 4 is the Novgorod, established in 1873, and was known as the warship that spun like a top. The late 19th century Russian Navy had a problem. They needed coastal defense ships that could pack heavy firepower while operating in shallow waters. Russian Admiral Andrei Popov had a solution that seemed brilliant on paper. Build a circular warship. The Novgorod was a 2,500-ton iron monster shaped like a massive dinner plate, 101 feet in diameter, armed with 2 massive 11-inch guns that could theoretically blast any enemy ship to pieces. The logic was sound. A circular hull would be more stable in shallow water, harder to hit, and could rotate to bring its guns to bear on any target. The Russian Navy was so confident they built not one but two of these floating pancakes. Construction took 3 years, cost a fortune, and everyone was convinced they'd revolutionized naval warfare. And that's where you come in, standing on the deck of what can only be described as a maritime nightmare. The moment those big guns fired, the entire ship would start spinning like a demented carousel. The circular hull, which was supposed to provide stability, instead turned every shot into a physics lesson on rotational force. You'd be gripping whatever you could find while the deck spun beneath your feet, trying not to vomit while your own ship's firepower literally made it impossible to aim at anything. The recoil from the guns would send the Novgorod into uncontrollable spins that lasted for minutes, during which time you were basically a sitting duck. Well, a spinning duck for any enemy ship that wanted to take target practice. The Russian Navy quickly realized they'd built the world's most expensive carnival ride. The Novgorod and its sister ship were relegated to harbor defense, where at least when they spun wildly after firing, they wouldn't drift into international waters and accidentally start a war with their own dizziness. Number 3. Greek fire siphons used during the time span of 7th to 12th century and was known as the flamethrower that flambéed the user. The Byzantine Empire was under constant siege from Arabs, Bulgars, and pretty much everyone else who looked at Constantinople and thought, "That looks nice, I'll take it." Their secret weapon was Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary mixture that burned on water, stuck to everything it touched, and could turn enemy ships into floating barbecues. The exact formula was such a closely guarded state secret that we still don't know what was in it today. What we do know is that it was deployed through bronze siphons, essentially medieval flamethrowers mounted on ships and city walls. These weapons could project streams of burning liquid over 100 feet, and for centuries they were the Byzantine Empire's ace in the hole. Enemy fleets would literally turn around and go home rather than face these weapons. The psychological impact was enormous. Imagine being a sailor and seeing ships ahead of you suddenly burst into flames that couldn't be extinguished with water. If you were a Byzantine soldier assigned to operate one of these siphons, you'd quickly learn that Greek fire didn't discriminate between enemy flesh and friendly flesh. The bronze nozzles would overheat and crack, spraying molten metal and burning chemicals backward onto the operators. The pumping mechanisms would fail under pressure, causing the entire apparatus to explode and shower everyone nearby with liquid fire that stuck to skin and armor like napalm. You'd be standing there trying to aim this ancient flamethrower, while your own weapon slowly cooked you alive from the inside out. The smell of your own burning hair would become a daily occupational hazard. The Byzantines eventually figured out better delivery methods, but for centuries, operating Greek fire siphons was essentially a suicide mission with decent pay. The empire lasted another 800 years after perfecting this weapon, so apparently the occasional friendly barbecue was worth the strategic advantage. Number 2 is the Tsar cannon used in 1586 and was known for the artillery piece that would flatten Moscow. Ivan the Terrible's Russia was surrounded by enemies, and the Kremlin needed the biggest, most intimidating piece of artillery ever built to defend Moscow. Russian cannon maker Andrei Chekhov was commissioned to create a monster that would make enemy armies wet themselves just looking at it. The result was the Tsar cannon, a bronze behemoth weighing 40 tons, with a bore diameter of 35 inches, capable of firing 800-kilogram stone cannonballs or, theoretically, loads of smaller shot that would turn attacking infantry into red mist. It was the largest cannon ever built, decorated with intricate reliefs of Tsar Pfeffer I on horseback, and positioned prominently in Red Square, where foreign ambassadors could see it and report back to their kings about Russia's terrifying military might. The psychological warfare was perfect. Just having this thing visible was worth several army divisions in deterrent value. And that's where you come in, hypothetically trying to fire this 40-ton monument to overcompensation. The Tsar cannon was never fired in battle, and for good reason. The recoil would have been so enormous it would have destroyed itself, killed everyone within 100 feet, and probably knocked down half the Kremlin walls. You'd light the fuse, run for your life, and then watch as Moscow's own defensive weapon leveled several city blocks behind it while maybe, if you were incredibly lucky, launching a projectile in the general direction of the enemy. The blast wave alone would have shattered every window in the city center, and probably triggered avalanches in mountains hundreds of miles away. The Tsar cannon sits in the Kremlin to this day, never having fired a shot in anger, which is probably the only reason Moscow is still standing. Sometimes the most effective military strategy is building a weapon so terrifying that you never actually have to use it. Lastly, number 1. The bat bomb used in 1943 and was known for Operation X-Ray's winged arsonists. World War II America was desperate for ways to strike back at Japan after Pearl Harbor, and the military was willing to consider any idea, no matter how insane. Dental surgeon Lytle Adams had what he thought was a stroke of genius. Attach tiny incendiary devices to Mexican free-tailed bats, drop them over Japanese cities at dawn, and let them roost in the wooden buildings before the timers ignited. The plan was called Project X-Ray, and it actually made it through multiple levels of military approval. The logic was sound. Bats were small, naturally sought out dark hiding places in buildings, and could carry payloads of napalm. The military spent 2 years and $2 million developing tiny harnesses, miniature time delay incendiary devices, and specialized containers that would release thousands of armed bats over target cities. Initial tests showed promise. The bats would disperse naturally and hide in exactly the kinds of structures that would maximize fire damage. If you were unlucky enough to be stationed at the Carlsbad Army Air Field Test Facility, you'd have front-row seats to one of the military's most spectacular friendly fire disasters. During testing, several armed bats escaped and immediately did what bats do. They found nice, dark places to roost. Unfortunately, those places included the test facility's buildings, fuel depots, and ammunition storage areas. Within hours, the entire base was on fire. You'd be running around trying to evacuate buildings while your own experimental weapons systematically burned down your entire military installation. The irony was perfect. The bats worked exactly as designed. They just didn't distinguish between Japanese buildings and American ones. The military canceled Project X-Ray shortly after, deciding that maybe setting your own air base on fire wasn't the best proof of concept. By the time they'd perfected the system, the atomic bomb had made the whole bat program obsolete anyway. So, there you have it. 5 times your ancestors almost got deleted by their own side's brilliant military innovations. You exist today not because humans are smart, but because the ones who survived were either incredibly lucky or smart enough to stay far away from their own military's latest game-changing weapons. Every generation thinks they've figured out the perfect way to win wars, and every generation discovers that the deadliest enemy is often the guy on your own side with a bright idea and access to explosives. Remember that the next time your biggest problem is slow internet, at least your Wi-Fi router has never tried to burn your house down or spin you into next week.